Hi, I'm Randy Altman with Post Perspective. We're here at NAB 2022, which is weird. We have Rodney Grubbs from NASA and Dylan Mathis from NASA, and we're going to talk about Project Artemis and a whole bunch of other things. So first, why don't we start with anyone who might not know what Project Artemis is?
So Artemis is our return to the moon. So Artemis, I believe, was the sister of Apollo, and so in mythology, right? And so they decided to name the next program going back to the moon Artemis. So the first flight will be a test flight of the SLS rocket. You may have seen the rollout a few weeks ago in the wet dress rehearsal. That's Artemis 1. And then Artemis 2 will be the first crewed mission to the moon. They're not going to land. It'll be a lot like Apollo 8, where they're going to test out all the spacecraft and maneuvers and everything around the moon. And then Artemis 3 will be the moon landing. And then after that, they're going to put a permanent station, build a permanent station around the moon called the Gateway. And we will be able to spend more and more time in deep space. All of this is a precursor to going to Mars. So we're going to learn a lot more about, spending that much time in deep space. The moon is a really good precursor mission. You can do precursor missions there.
Sure.
Yeah.
Now, why don't we talk a little bit about how this technology here at NAB plays a role in Artemis?
Right. So we are hoping to be able to use as much commercial technology as possible for the imaging systems when we go back to the moon. So we're looking at cameras, we're looking at encoders, all the pieces of an imagery system that we can leverage from commercial enterprise, right? So bandwidth is really precious from the moon, so we're looking for really high efficient encoding, good UHD cameras. The crew is going to walk around with a handheld camera, so we're working on that project to have the handheld camera for the moon. This time we'll, instead of like in the moon, we had a Hasselblad film camera and a television camera that were separate. And this time we're going to have one camera to do it all, and we hope to do it all in UHD. And then when all the imagery gets into the ground, we've got to record it, we've got to manage it, we've got to distribute it. So all of those piece parts as a system are what we're interested in here.
Have you picked the camera that you're going to use?
We have a candidate camera for the handheld camera.
Okay.
Right now we're looking at the latest flagship from Nikon, the Z9. As Dylan is well aware, we've had a long heritage of flying Nikon cameras on the space station, and we're going to use the space station as a testing ground. So we're hoping to fly the Nikon Z9 sometime next year and test it with EVA. We've never flown a mirrorless camera before, so everything that we've flown in the past is a mirrored camera. And so there are a lot of advantages to a mirrorless camera. They're smaller, but there are some things we're worried about. And so we're going to use the space station as a way to test some of that out. Since it doesn't have an optical viewfinder, the crew are going to have to rely on the electronic screen on the back. And there's a lot of worry that when the sun is behind them during an EVA, that it's going to blank out and they can't see anything. So we're going to have to figure out how to make a hood or make some way for them to see that. So there's a lot of things like that we're looking at.
Now, Dylan, why don't you talk a little bit about the space station and what Rodney was saying about how you're testing stuff out? And will you have like a backup camera just in case? I like backup plans. Just wondering.
Well, like Rodney was saying, the space station is an incredible test bed because it allows us to get into zero gravity. We have some amount of radiation that is there as well, and that allows us to really shake test, if you will, or really put it through its paces. And taking a camera outside is a big deal, and that's essentially what they'll be doing on the moon. Is there'll be a camera outside for an extended period of time, and so there's things like batteries you have to worry about, and in cold temperatures, temperature swings from plus 200 Fahrenheit to minus 200 Fahrenheit, all those kind of things. And Space Station gives us that opportunity to kind of test ahead of time and learn and get smart before we go to the moon and then as a stepping stone, what we learn on the moon, then we go to Mars, like Rodney was saying.
So in terms of the testing, what have you discovered? Is there an example of something that you tried that didn't work that you had to adjust? A happy story, a happy ending?
I'll give you that one.
Yeah, thanks a lot. Well, I'm thinking about a couple of things. I'm probably going to have to hand this back to you, but when they were looking at the last Nikon, they found some things in the firmware that, in the way the menus worked and everything, that they needed Nikon to fix to make it easier. Because one of the challenges when you go EVA is you've got those big gloved hands. So, a DSLR, for example, it's got all kinds of knobs and widgets on it that are intended for fingers here on Earth. Well, if you're wearing gloved hands and the camera is covered by a thermal blanket to protect it and keep it from burning up, then you got to build a casing around it and have different functions and stuff. And so I think you guys have had Nikon make changes, and Canon too, for the video camera as well.
Yeah, absolutely. We work with Canon and Nikon both in this instance, and it allows us to do things so the cameras don't time out and turn off, and make it easier for the crew, where they just are able to hit several buttons and be able to get a function without having to drill down in a menu where they're up at the top level. They're still doing the same function that the camera already has. It's not like we're asking for new features. It's just easier ways to access it for the most part.
And usually those wind up being in the product. The next firmware will have the NASA mode in it or whatever.
That's pretty cool.
Yeah.
All right. Well, before I let you guys go, what are you interested in here? What's your task for the day or the week?
Well, I'm interested in artificial intelligence for an imaging system. So a way to automate some functions and capabilities. For example, the Gateway, when it's orbiting the moon, it's only going to be crewed about 45 days a year. The rest of the time, it's going to be on autopilot. And so I'm interested in, could we have the camera system be aware of its surroundings and sort of be like a security system where it gives alerts, kind of like your Ring cameras or whatever, that tell you, hey, something just moved, right? So if we can teach the camera, this is what the surface of the spacecraft is supposed to look like, it can detect when it's changed and then alert ground control and say, hey, something just happened because that surface is no longer the way it used to be, and I just happened to record it because it's been in a loop, and I flagged it, and I've sent a message to ground controllers of, hey, something just happened. So I'm going to be looking at vendors who can do a closed loop AI, because most AIs are using cloud servers and that kind of thing. Like Facebook doesn't do it anymore, but when they had facial recognition, some of that was happening on your phone and some of it was happening on a server somewhere. In this case, we can't have any of that happening on a server somewhere because there is no somewhere. We're out in the middle of space. So that's one of the main things I'm going to be looking for.
From my perspective, in 2017, Rodney and I were the mission managers for the first UHD downlink from space station, and all of that gear that we had to use was like Frankenstein, and it was a bunch of stuff getting put together, and it was complicated. Fast forward to 2022, and we actually have Canon XF705s, which have live UHD IP come out the back of the camera, which for us solves a lot of issues and makes things a lot easier. So what I'm looking for is once we get that UHD on the ground, from a public outreach standpoint, how do we take that and make it useful and can get it out, can switch, can put a character generator in there, all those different kinds of things, and try to make this progression from HD to UHD. That's a big step for us.
It's fantastic, guys. Thank you very much for stopping by and taking the time, and maybe we'll do this again next year.
Yeah, I hope so.
Be glad to.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thanks for having us.